prisons because I was interested in what was happening inside of them. But I didn't want to go in as a photographer or, in quotes, a tourist looking around. And I happened to find out about an opportunity through the Prison University Project, which is a nonprofit organization in San Francisco that offers an AA program to the men inside San Quentin. So I started going in as a volunteer professor, teaching the first ever history of photography class there. And although the class was about history and about learning the importance of the image, I wanted the men in the class to also get a feel for what it was like to create and to insert their own creativity into an image. So one of the exercises we came up with was this idea of mapping a photograph, of looking at it, dissecting what's there, and figuring out how to insert your own narrative into the piece. And one of the things that I really love about photography is that it's this generous medium that allows all of us to become part of what we're looking at. It also rewards looking at detail. And I feel like we can understand complex situations, we can understand other people if we understand the details of their life and what they're interested in. And for me, photography really stands in as something that can do that. Clicker, okay. So this is one of the images we used. This is a photograph by Eggleston. And what I did was to print the image on two sides of one paper, 11 by 17 inches, and give different photographs to the men in the class. And they were allowed to take the images back to their housing unit, live with it for a couple of weeks, map one side of it, and then use their mappings to create a narrative about what they saw in the photograph. I told the guys who the artists were, but really nothing about the photograph. The idea was really for them to investigate it themselves. So this is an example of the mapping. And I like the details that he notes. The thing that really stands out for me with Marvin's dissection is the top, where he circles the door and writes an arrow that says, "Figure this out," as if he himself is trying to figure a way to get out of the photograph, or maybe by extension, how to get out of prison. I talked about how I think photography is a generous medium that allows us to insert ourselves into the image. And the narrative that Marvin wrote about this photograph was based on his insistence that no matter what I said, this photograph was taken in South Central LA where he grew up. And he creates on the bottom, you can see this complicated kind of family tree about all the people he knew in South Central and what would happen kind of during their daily excursions. So again, he takes a photograph that has nothing to do with his particular existence and finds it a way to make it about something that he can understand. Another example of that is a photograph by Stephen Shore. This was done by John. And I really do love all the details that he figures out here. He didn't know the date of the photograph, but because he spent so much time looking at it, he discovered the marquee of the movie theater. And the movie, what's it called? Night Moves is playing. And he remembers that that came out in 1975. And through that, he's able to date the photograph. He also talks about a sign that you can see on the right of the photograph that says discounts. And he sees how that's a newer sign, and from that he realizes that this is a neighborhood that used to be wealthy that has now fallen on hard times. And the narrative that he creates based on this photograph is one about a man, the character in the center, who's leaving prison and going back to a home that he just doesn't recognize anymore. One of the things that's interesting in prison is that there are no computers. So most people are writing by hand, and that's something I just don't see anymore. So I also like looking just at the beauty of the handwriting and the way that it's interacting with the paper. This is a photograph that I'm sure many of you know by Joel Sternfeld. And if you don't know the story behind it, it looks like there's an intentional fire and the firefighter is just ignoring the picture. But if you know more about the picture, you know that it's a controlled burn. And it brings up something that Debbie mentioned this morning during her talk, and something I think about a lot with photography or with any creative endeavor, and that is that you can start with fact or fiction, but inevitably one recalls the other. And if that's not used in a political circumstance, I do find it disturbing when it's used in the political world. But when it's used in the art world, I think it's really fascinating because it talks about how we're always struggling to come to terms with our existence, which is fact and fiction mingled together. So I just point that out because this photograph is really about fact and fiction. So Joseph, who is looking at this picture, obviously notes the fire, and his narrative is written from the perspective of somebody who owns the farm. And I'm glad to hear you laugh, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But first he writes about the perspective of loss and how his childhood place is going to be going away. But what will never go away is this recipe for a special pie, Mrs. McLean's pie. And when I tell people that I work in prison, people kind of expect that everything I'm going to have to say about it is dour and upsetting and depressing. And indeed, there is plenty of that inside of prison. But there's also a lot of humor and lightheartedness and love. And that kind of thing comes across in that really kind of sweet recipe for pie. While I was teaching, I did that for 3 semesters, I was given access to an amazing archive of photographic negatives taken at San Quentin State Prison between 1938 and about 1984. They were all taken by correctional officers as a way to document events inside the prison. There's tens of thousands of negatives, and they were just kind of moldering away in a storage facility. Nobody was seemingly taking care of them. And I was really fortunate to be given access to them. So since about 2012, I've been going through them, organizing them, scanning them, and trying to make sense of them. It's interesting to me that the correctional officers were using 4x5 cameras up until the 80s. I mean, that does tell you that change happens very slowly inside of a prison. But because of that, the negatives are gorgeous, and they make beautiful prints, although, as I said, they document everything inside the prison, from murders to suicides, to really very painful things to look at, to weddings and parties and people at jobs. Kind of all the things that happen outside happen inside with the added element of violence. So the negatives were not organized. Some of them are in these envelopes, and there's a date and a brief description, but a lot of them are open to interpretation. So the first part of just working with this was just trying to make kind of categories of what I would find. And there were images that clearly reference life in prison, like this escape dummy that somebody had made. One of the, kind of on a side note, one of the things you learn when you spend a lot of time in prison is that there's incredible creativity inside, because there are a lack of resources. People have to figure out in many ways how to take care of themselves. So although I don't know how this escape dummy was made, somehow it was molded with found material, and then obviously using real hair to create the eyebrows and the hair. This is an image of a suicide. This place in San Quentin is called Suicide Alley. I'm sorry, the next image is pretty gruesome, just to give you a heads up. There's images of traumas, large and small. And you really have to wonder, why would someone even take a photograph of a single Band-Aid? And then there's also really beautiful images that don't reference prison at all. You'd have no idea you were there. So this is from a family visit. This is called Mother's Day. You can probably guess from the clothes, it's the 70s, 1976. Yes. This one's called 2 Inmates and a Seal. So sometimes the titling is incredibly obvious, but I find kind of funny. So as I said, I was going through the negatives, trying to organize them. And on their own, I think they're incredibly interesting to look at, but I also felt like there was a key component missing, and that was figuring out how to collaborate with the men inside to bring this archive to life in a different way. As I mean, I call myself an outsider. I've been working in a prison since 2011, but I've never been incarcerated. So when I look at them, I bring my experience as a free person to what I see there. But when the men inside look at them, they're able to interpret them and escort us around the image and show us things that we may or may have not seen, things that we miss, and ways that we can then see the photograph in a new light. So I use the same principle that I did with the photographs by well-known men, which was to, well-known photographers, which was to invite men to become part of a photography group where I brought images in from the archive. We sat and talked about them, and then they were able to bring images back to their housing unit to map and to write about. So this is a picture of Kevin, who was part of the project. This is in the housing unit, North Block. And I want to show you just a couple examples of those. So here's an image without any writing, without any intervention on it, called Stabbing in the Gym. And then here's the interpretation done by Ruben Ramirez, who was one of my students and also worked on this project. And I love how he writes about the picture. And after reading his words, I can never look at this image in the same way. It's no longer this cold, clinical image of someone who's been stabbed. It's an image about striving, it's an image about dualities, and it's an image about experience. And he writes across the body, which I think is also really beautiful. The arms symbolize buttresses, attempting to prevent the structural failure of a once proud cathedral. Encouragement and enlightenment versus indifference and authoritative tyranny. And to have someone look at an image of brutality and to be able to see it in these architectural terms was really stunning to me. I mean, it's poetic, it's alluring, but it doesn't deny the brutality either of the image. And Ruben is someone who didn't have a lot of education before he came to prison. He ended up getting his AA degree in college, in the college program. But he was so profoundly moved by the image and found this personal and kind of enlightening way to talk about something. I'm interested, obviously, in issues of prison reform and how we can change prisons, and I don't believe that people are interested in that through numbers and statistics. I think we make change through stories and through personal communication, and that's really, what this project is about. Here's another example of a photograph that was written on. This was at a family visit, and it's kind of an amusing image because there's this man in the front luxuriating in this woman's lap, and he can't see that behind him is another man with his hands on this woman's shoulders. And so you don't know exactly what's happening here. And Shah, who mapped this very smartly at the bottom, just said, this is a picture of free love, which makes a lot of sense. And then the final example was an image that was mapped by Shakur. And what appears to be a fight being photographed is, again, this commingling of fact and fiction. Because as you look at it, you notice that there's a man in the bottom corner looking up at the photographer. And obviously, if there was a fight going on, this couldn't be happening. So what Shakur figured out was that this was a reenactment that correctional officers were photographing as evidence of what an altercation could look like. So working on with these photographic projects and thinking about stories encouraged me to work on a very different kind of storytelling project inside the prison, which is the podcast Ear Hustle, which I started with Earlonne Woods and Antoine Williams, both pictured here, who at the time were incarcerated at San Quentin. And our idea was to tell the everyday stories of life inside prison, told from the perspective of those who live it. Originally, the idea was to air it only inside prisons, but while we were working on it, we entered a contest through Radiotopia and were lucky enough to win this contest. And the podcast ended up being aired outside the prison, and we're now in starting our 5th season. When we started the podcast, I knew nothing about audio, neither did Earlonne or Antoine or the other men we worked with. So we really had to learn everything together as a group, and I think that's a really wonderful way to start a collaboration when everyone starts at the same place. So I want to play a small clip from the podcast. This is from an episode called Looking Out, which is about this guy Roach, who loves animals and takes care of all kinds of critters inside prison. And so for me, the topic of the podcast, this episode is really about finding love and giving love inside a place where it's really hard to do that. And for me, the podcast is very similar to the way I look at photography, which is it's about details, it's about observation, and it's about the quiet, small things. This clip also really highlights the way the podcast works. Erlan and I are the hosts that bring you in and out of the story. There's varied emotions within the podcast, and it has rich sound design, which is all done by Antoine Williams. Okay, so here's the clip.
So how would you describe him?
To me, I think Roach looked like the original Jesus Christ. You know, I mean, he got the dreadlocks. He looked like he's from the earth. And if he could, he'd probably just be wearing a leaf. And he got this one little thing that he do. He'll just start sniffing on his dreadlocks.
I know, I've seen him do that. He grabs his hair and he pulls it in front of his nose and just sniffs.
Why you whispering?
Because I feel like I'm talking about him behind his back. He knows he does it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like he's going to hear this and go, oh my God, I sniffed my hair?
Hey, he'll catch himself and you just be looking at him, he like,
FYI, I do smell my dreads. I put different oil on each one of them. They smell good. They smell like I just came out the dirt, hanging out with roots and stuff.
But you know what though? When people from the outside look at Roach, they be like, oh, dude weird, man, I ain't talking to dude. But Roach is a cool dude.
My name is Renell Draper, but I go by Roach. My relationship with people is pretty strained. I don't trust them. From early on, they have been a source of pain for me.
So Roach is about 40 years old, and he's a pretty shy guy.
Until you know him.
When I was a child, before I was removed from the care of my mom's custody, she tried to drown me a couple times in the tub. And then she stopped and she left the bathroom and she was crying. I knew she was unhappy or sad at something I did. I wanted to actually comfort her, but I didn't know how to do it. I don't remember her face, and I haven't seen her since.
So again, that's a really good example of what the podcasts sound like, going from things that will make you laugh to things that are arresting and quite upsetting. I've heard this clip so many times, and every time I hear the end where he says, I don't remember my mother's face, it's such an intense thing to say. It's not saying I don't remember her, but I don't remember her face, and that's such a profound loss. I want to end on a little bit of a happier note, though. People ask me a lot, how do you define success? And how do you know when a project works? And for me, a project is successful when it inspires other people to do their own work and do their own storytelling. And this is a picture of Ruben Ramirez, who did this incredible piece. And I think he's watching the live feed, so hi, Ruben. He's very shy, though, so. Anyway, after we worked on the project together and through talking about photography, he told me that he could now see fascination everywhere. And isn't that a great way to think about life, that we can see fascination everywhere, no matter where we are? The other thing I love is that when work you do inspires other people to not just think, but to get creative themselves. And it doesn't matter what the medium is. It's the idea that it's created the impulse to make and to share. And so I just wanted to share these three amazing things that Ear Hustle listeners have done. So whether it's creating a blanket through knitting, or a digital drawing, or incredible nail art, it all represents the impulse that we have, which is to be creative and to tell stories and hopefully connect in a world that can feel very distant and cold. So I'm gonna leave it there and hope that you all feel the spirit to create.
Thank you. That was fabulous. And I do hope Ruben is watching. Hey. I'm Vince. How are you guys? You good? We're thrilled to have Wajahat Ali with us today. When we try to match people for these conversations, we look for many different things, pairing differing personalities or shared interests or colleagues. Sometimes we look for young and dynamic social entrepreneurs, or even an author, or even a playwright. In some cases, occasionally we'll look for a television host or a presenter or a commentator from a place like CNN, or even an op-ed writer from a newspaper like the New York Times, or TED speaker, maybe a lawyer, but never one person who has done all of those things and continues to do many of them. He's able to keep his sense of humor. A few days ago, he rang in the new year with a series of tweets charting the last 10 years. Beginning of the decade, I was completely broke. My credit was shot. I was driving a 97 Camry without a door handle. My health was terrible. I was single. I'll close out the decade with an amazing wife, 3 lovely kids, a Honda minivan, better credit, and a career. Keep hustling. Wajahat Ali. Welcome to our little Chobi Mela. For those who don't know, Chobi Mela is the first festival of photography in Asia, and it was created by Shahidul Alam, a singular force who has dedicated his life to the pursuit of truth. Photographer, author, curator, and activist, but not always in that order. He gave a voice to those who could see but were not being heard, arming them with the language of photography, and empowering a generation of photographers to turn the camera on themselves and their culture for the world to see. There are those in this room who know you personally, those who know about you and your journey, and those who know of you. And all of us are happy to see you here today, because while you may not have been in this room, your presence and influence has been felt here for many years. Please welcome Shahidul Alam and Wajahat Ali.
Thank you, Vince. If I wasn't married, I could score 2 dates off that intro. That was amazing. How's everyone doing? Thank you for that overwhelmingly enthusiastic response. That was awesome. Lovely. Thank you to my people, the proletariat watching from the cafeteria and the spillover. Thank you to all those who are watching us on the YouTube. And thank you to Shahidul Alam, who has come here all the way from Dhaka, Bangladesh, to be with us today for the Storyteller Summit. Thank you, Shahidul. Good to be here. So Shahidul and I met 3 years ago in Dhaka when I was actually working with Facebook, Google, and the UN to help some young Bangladeshi change agents and artists. And I just reached out to you through our mutual friend Salma to be a judge to help mentor these kids. And you came by, we met, and this was before you were public enemy #1. A lot could happen in 3 years, right? And I never would have thought that here we would be in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital 3 years later. You have a very eventful life, my friend. And as we talk about it, and I think it's very important, Time Magazine Person of the Year, celebrated photographer, many people who are watching, they're like, oh, Shahidul Alam, so inspiring. I wish I could be like that. Who am I? I'm just an average Jose or Joe. And I think the origin story of you superheroes is very important. And if I may, I want to begin with, you know, we've talked before, and I always call you the accidental photographer. And this journey began with an accidental birth. Can you explain that?
Okay, well, it was a candid moment. The picture is of my parents, my brother and my sister. My dad's a microbiologist, my mum's a school teacher, 2 kids, nice, happy family. My dad's elder sister passes away, leaving 4 orphans, and a family with 2 kids becomes a family of 6 kids. My mum does extra work, my dad does too, and they make ends meet, but they certainly don't plan on a 7th child at that time. Yeah? But, well, it happens. So it was much later, I think, when I'm 29 or something like that my mother candidly tells me, you were an accident. Well,
did it sting at 29, or you're like, damn, Mom?
No, we have a very, well, she's passed away. We had a lovely relationship, and it was nice the way she said it as well. But she's...
But speaking about your mom, if I may, your mother is this force.
4'2" and a dynamite.
And we're going to talk about this not only as you as a photographer, as an artist, as an activist, but education runs deep, and it's almost like a genetic inheritance for you. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, my mother, she's in Kolkata. My dad wants an educated wife.
Smart man.
Completely. But, he's a microbiologist in the army, very eligible bachelor. Lots of people want, lots of applicants. But then he wants an educated wife, and my grandmother gives in. She's not really interested in the bride going to university. So my mother puts on a burqa. My dad's younger brother takes her to visit her friends, and that's how she graduates. After partition, comes over to Bangladesh. My mother wants to set up a school. No one's interested. So she pitches this tent. She buys a tent for 10 taka, pitches this tent in the middle of a playground, 14 kids. It's now possibly the best known school and college for girls in the country.
Yeah. I just want to repeat that one woman, a 4-foot something dynamo, just pitches a tent, and fast forward 5 decades later, and you just said is one of the best well-known schools in Bangladesh. Continue, please.
And of course, in the school, she does more than teach arithmetic and maths, music, theater. I was involved. That's my mother teaching me to play the harmonium. So all of that is part and parcel of what this is. But not everything was easy. But I'll come to that later. 3 women, very important in my life. My sister on the left, Renama, my partner in the middle, my mum on the right. Powerful personalities and didn't always go too well, but I'll pass on that for now. But
important how they shaped you. I mean,
completely,
your muses throughout life.
I continue to be. I mean, they're very important women, but men too, but other very important women. With Saidia, who, Renama, for instance, while I was in jail, she went every day to jail. No one could convince her. She said, I don't trust these guys. I want to be here. I want to make sure you're there. She made that trip every day, but the others, Saidia, my niece, Salma here, Chuli in Sri Lanka, Nayantara in Nepal. I mean, they've all played a huge role. But I'll move actually to 1971, which for me was very significant. This is a picture by Penny Tweedy, and she actually gave us that print when we first did Chobimala, as was mentioned. And this is a woman going through a field with a rifle. I mean, I don't know who she is. Disappeared, perhaps. In the history books, this is not a person who will feature. But the War of Liberation was our battle, all of us. We wanted liberation. And for me, what was very significant comes to this image. This was taken on the 14th of December, 1971, the killing fields of Rai Bazar, taken by Rashid Talukdar, who actually won the Pioneer Award at National Geographic before it was discontinued. But for me, what was very significant was how through that war I changed. And what happened immediately, this was something that was being done by Pakistani armies when they knew they were going to leave the country, they were losing. They wanted to cripple the country intellectually.
Yeah.
So the leading artists, scholars, journalists were all invited. And this is what we found on the 17th of December. We got independent on the 16th. So the nation was crippled. And, my parents wanted me to carry on studying. My sister was in Liverpool. So they managed to cobble up a ticket, one-way ticket.
But if we may, for those of you who don't know, with the 1971 war, I mean, it was, Bangladesh was called East Pakistan. And for those of you who don't know geography, Americans are really bad at geography. There's Pakistan, this small country called India, and then Bangladesh. And so Bangladesh, from the inception of 1947, wanted its own independence. And this 1971 war, it was one of the worst rapes of the 20th century. It was Pakistani Muslims taking vengeance against Bangladeshi Muslims. And in Pakistan, to this day, you don't mention this. It doesn't happen. Or if it was their fault. And there is this lingering trauma. And I appreciate that you mentioned that they went after the intellectuals, because they always go after the artists and intellectuals and thinkers. Those voices are always the most threatening, it seems, to power.
So,
I just want to...
No, it's important. And here I suspect Native Americans get left out, in Britain colonialism get left out. So there are those accidental omissions.
Yeah.
So I'm in Britain, and I'm from a middle-class home, so you're meant to become a doctor, an engineer.
That's it. That's all you can be. Doctor, engineer, business. Failure.
Lawyers, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so I study biochemistry and genetics. I graduate. I then go on to do a PhD.
Good Bangladeshi kid
yes,
so far?
Exactly.
Everything
So
good?
far, it's also
checking the
good.
boxes.
Yeah. And that's the stage when I get introduced to the Socialist Workers' Party, left politics, get very involved in race issues, class issues, all of that sort of thing, Poland, Solidarność movement. And that's when I discover the power of photography.
Uh-oh.
Exactly. And I think, does Bangladesh need yet another research chemist?
And your mother would say yes.
But precisely.
Yes, Shahidul, yes.
So anyway, they don't know about this. I'm doing this PhD. But while I'm doing this, I'm taking a few pictures, and I decide to test it out to see if I can actually make a living out of it. And there's an advert in a newspaper for a photographer in a small studio called the Young Rascals. And basically you take pictures of kids. So I'd go around, spread a sheepskin rug, a blue background, and take happy pictures of kids. It paid well, $500 a week in those days, lots of money. What I also did was amateur photography and things like that, and I'm doing nude studies on myself because I'm the only one available.
No, but it's like, that's what's interesting. It's all DIY, right? You had no training.
Completely.
You got possession of this camera, and you're like, this is interesting. Let me just go out and see what I can do.
Actually, getting the camera was also a bit of an interesting accident because, this was Freddie Laker days. Some of you will remember the Laker Airways, cheap, £90 you could get a London to New York flight. So I thought, poor student, this is my chance to go to the United States. So I get on a Sky train. A friend of mine tells me, cameras are cheap, dollars low, buy me a camera from the United States. So I go to, I'm not sure if B&H was there, but Hessian Jewish shop. I buy a Nikon FM, a tripod, a rickety tripod, a flash gun and everything. And I go around, hitch. Those were the days you could hitch. Hitching around the United States, hitching around Canada, come back to London. He doesn't have the money to pay for it. I'm stuck with a camera. So I take some pictures. And, this next one is from that period. And Richard Moses will be jealous. This is infrared photography.
It's a beautiful photo.
Thank you. But, that's what I was doing, trying to take pretty pictures. But this really wasn't why I'd come into photography. One very interesting thing happened at that time, because I was taking these pictures of kids, but I wasn't happy about the photography I was doing. Yeah. So I complained. They said, what are you talking about? You're our star photographer. You make more money than everyone else.
$500 a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Crushing it. Yeah.
So I started thinking, if I stay in this setup and everyone tells me I'm a great photographer, I'll start believing this.
Yeah.
I'm in the zone of comfort and everyone tells me nice things. I thought, too dangerous. So that was when I decided to make a clean break, go over to Bangladesh. I'm going to become a photojournalist. But of course, I've got no track record. I've never worked for a newspaper. I don't have a portfolio. This is what I want to do. But, there was money to be made. And
This, my friend, is truth to power.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is the war on Christmas waged by Muslims. Yes.
I took rats. I took pretty women. I took flowers. Whatever came.
You had to pay the bills.
Well, exactly. But something else was interesting. I decided to go back home and live with my parents. They're very important people in my life. I'd left home when I was 17. I came back as a 29-year-old. I wanted to know these people. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I'd lived independently for all these years, go home. In my parents' house, middle-class home, there's home help. And this little boy, Mizan, he cleans what we call the drawing room where we watch television.
Yeah.
Except that he's not allowed to sit inside to watch TV with us. He sits outside that doorway. And what we'd done by then, we'd set up an agency. I'll come back to that later. But we were using calendars. And calendars at that time they had pretty pictures. You know, we don't have naked women by waterfalls, but we have, you know, mosques and nature and pretty women and things like that. We decided to use our calendar for social messages. So this picture of Mizan watching television was printed in our calendar. I gave a copy to Mizan. I gave a copy to my mother. The following day, Mizan sat inside that room to watch TV with us.
Yeah.
Very powerful moment.
And I think for people, just if you've ever gone to South Asia, the class divide is so immense that this is a revolutionary photo to have someone literally invade and enter that space. It shows you that all politics are personal and how you can actually change a mindset of your family with one single photograph.
And this was my own family, very emancipated people. But so what I'm also doing, again, no one's hiring me to do photojournalism, but there's a general. I've left an independent nation. I've come back to find a general has taken over. So I'm in the streets taking pictures of the resistance. And this Street Azad was this is at the Shahid Minar. Later on, this young man was very important. On his back, it says, "Let democracy be freed." And on the 10th of November, 1987, he was killed by the police. This is at a campus. In fact, the university where my partner used to teach, where she set up the first department of anthropology. But so I'm taking these pictures, but over a period of time, I'm 88, we have a massive flood. That's when I get commissioned. You know, that's when people suddenly find it interesting.
Trauma, pain.
Yes, exactly. You know,
Poverty porn for the West.
This struggle for democracy, no one was interested.
No one cares.
Yeah, but come the floods, I get commissioned. That's not bad either. But while that's going on, there is this wedding, the wedding of the daughter of a powerful minister, taking place at a time when the nation is reeling under this devastating flood. Everyone's there. You know, the who's who of Bangladesh is there, but no one mentions a word. The minister is the owner of a very, very powerful newspaper. Everyone knows the rules. Interestingly, I tried to show this work. It was going to be shown on the 10th of November, 89, exactly 2 years to Nur Hussein's death. Alliance Française, the sponsor, backs off. Bicentennial of French Revolution, 1989, but that doesn't seem to matter. So I don't have a sponsor, I don't have a space. We put the show up anyway.
If you don't mind, can you go back to the previous photo? And then now just go back to the wedding. So I just want you to reflect on this because in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, this is common. If you were to tell people this, they'd go, yeah, this happens all the time. Why do you think the juxtaposition of these two photos, which are so common and well known to everyone in Bangladesh, Pakistan, in India, is so dangerous to people?
Well, everyone knows, but no one speaks. And I think that's where the difference is. And while those connections are what we make, we don't specify them as such. And here was I challenging a military general, challenging his minister, and talking about the reality at a time when the nation was reeling under those floods. But something else happened. These pictures, the flood pictures anyway, again, the West is interested in floods and disasters of all sorts. So this exhibit went to the side gallery in Newcastle, and then to a show in Belfast. And I'm staying with Irish friends, Paddy and Deborah. They have a lovely 5-year-old daughter, Karina. And I'm back from the show. I'm putting some coins in the pocket. And she's standing at the doorway staring at me. I say, "What's the matter, Karina?" She says, "You've got money?" "Yes, I've got money." But you're from Bangladesh."
5-year-old girl.
5-year-old girl. And it got me thinking about the sort of social, political, cultural environment within which a child grows, where she's incapable of seeing a Bangladeshi as anything other than an icon of poverty, because these are the pictures she's grown up with. And that has been our identity. So that's when I decided I would set up an agency so we could tell our own stories.
And it's so powerful, right? Like when people hear us say that, they go, oh, you're always whining and complaining. But, and I'm looking at that frame to your left, what gets in the frame, what gets left out? And what gets left out is the narratives of 150 million people in Bangladesh, to the point where a 5-year-old girl, when she thinks of Bangladesh, she just thinks this.
That's it.
This is unimaginable.
Well, there is the other side as well. We did manage to get the general down. And suddenly, the same gallery that had turned our show down because actually they'd said, it's photography, it's not art, so we can't show it. Yeah? But the same art gallery, once the general goes, accepts to show photography. And in 3.5 days, we had 400,000 people coming to see it.
Wow.
It was incredible. We had near riots at the entrance. And people were just being shoveled in. And it's, we had no money.
It's cardboard, right?
Yes,
looks like
exactly.
cardboard.
Yeah, we just stuck
Cardboard
up
and
those
tape.
pictures. That's
I
it.
love it.
That's it. But, for us, it was still very powerful that photographs could have that engagement and that people were so hungry for those images.
How was the response? Like, if you have 400,000 people literally coming just to see photos on cardboard, how did the people respond to the art?
They were blown away because, you see, another very interesting thing happened at that time. The military general had censored, and initially the newspapers started redacting spaces, and then they decided they wouldn't publish. So that was very brave. With the military general, they decided they wouldn't publish. So the people were hungry. Right. They wanted to see, and we finally got the general down. So there was huge response, but what it also led to was an election. And for me, this image was very important because I felt that she, with her vote, was avenging Nur Hussein's death. But then, elections, we tend to think elections are all there is to democracy.
Hope change.
And I soon discovered otherwise. The campaign, this is Khaleda Zia, who later became prime minister. On her campaign trail, it's joyous, exuberant. This is Khaleda Zia after she gets elected. And, the relationship between her and the public sort of changes. But, of course, it's true for all of them. Again, we've taken all these pictures. No one was interested. 29th of April, 1991, a cyclone. Suddenly, everyone's interested in pictures again. And the New York Times contacts us. We want those pictures. They even sent us sample pictures. We have them. And, we've just started a small agency, New York Times, big client. We don't really want to lose this, but we thought, we've got to say it. So we write to them to say, we've got those pictures, but we don't think that's the story. So Nancy Lee, the deputy picture editor, to be fair to her, says, okay, tell us what the story is. And we did a full-page spread on the New York Times about farmers replanting seeds, fishermen going out, fixing their boats, people helping each other, and to the best of my knowledge, possibly the only photo spread of that time that didn't dwell on bodies. So that was important. But we felt, yes, it can be done. But we also thought of other things. While I was questioning what white Western photographers got me in doing, but I, as a male middle-class photographer, was also someone in power. If I'm photographing a woman who doesn't have a door to shut on my face, the control is with me, and she very rarely gets to decide what image it'll be. So we decided we would challenge our own position. And so this is a group of 10-year-old working-class kids we started teaching photography to.
Great.
Both girls are significant. The girl on the left is Rabea. The girl on the right is Molly, who later became my assistant and now is an editor in one of the leading newspapers. So the first day I'm working with them. We did this. We also started training women photographers. The first day we're doing this, I show pictures to Molly, and the other kids, and Molly looks at this picture. This is a picture taken by one of my students, Aziz Rahim Puyu, who's passed away sadly. And she says, oh, that's the fire in number 10. What happened in number 10? What's there to say? the owner took the bodies and dumped them in the drain at night. How do you know? Everyone knows. What happened? Nothing ever happens, she says. And then Waits says, if I had a camera, I'd take his picture, I'd put that guy in jail. Now here I am, a photojournalist. You know, we know our pictures often don't make a difference, but the fact that this 10-year-old girl had that belief was something that fired me up.
If you don't mind me asking, when she was given a camera, or when she was given your mentorship, or when she, I'm assuming, had someone like you just believe in her, what was the change, if any?
No, well, firstly, we just had fun. You know, we used to go around. And I remember the first day I said, where do you want to go? So they gave a whole list of, they'd go to Cox's Bazar, they'd go to Sundarbans and photograph a tiger, they'd go to, this was a huge list of what they were going to do that day. And we'd go around, and I had a little station wagon, and there were 11 kids. They were meant to be 10, and they took another one on, so there were 11. We'd all get into this. Every 5 minutes, I had to stop the car to change so someone else would sit in the front seat. That's how it went. We had fun. And the pictures in themselves were interesting, but I think what for us was more interesting is they were telling their own story.
Right.
And they were telling very powerful stories that were not being told up till that point. And that, we might not have the time to show that, but that became important. But I also began to look at other things, and this was a series where I worked on the river Brahmaputra, and I show this simply because this is also the time when I'm trying to make the international connections, the river, and how it links. This is a river that goes from China to India to Bangladesh, and how different countries control rivers, and how the relationship of people with rivers changes. And that was the first time I went to Tibet. And then Wasfia Nazreen, who played a very important role in freeing me when I was arrested, was very involved with the Free Tibet movement. So she wanted us to show.
You've now this is the step in your career where you're an international troublemaker.
Well, getting there. But I'm a national troublemaker too, and so we have this show.
I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not going to deny you that role, of course.
So this is Professor Muzaffar Ahmed, who was the chairperson of Transparency International, who we invited to open our show. But a show in Tibet, Chinese government leans on our government, who leans on me, closes down our show. So we have the opening in the street, and the government provides a nice background.
They were there to protect you,
well,
of course.
Absolutely. You'll see more protection later on.
They're aficionados of art,
absolutely,
of course, yes.
But then I also look to see how else I can make work, because if I'm working very directly, then shows get stopped more easily. So at that time, there's something that's happening called crossfire, which was a euphemism for extrajudicial killings. And I decided to do a show on that. This is something that was bothering people very much. But, the Rapid Action Battalion who did the killing weren't going to take me along. Yeah, by the way, we're about to do a crossfire. Come along, take some pictures.
Yeah.
So I had to find another way. And I didn't want the show to get closed down. So what we did was a lot of research, and we created images which we felt were the last images that the dying person might have seen. But we did something else which was very significant. When I showed the earlier picture of the wedding, it was turned down everywhere, but it was reviewed by a magazine which belonged to the wife of the minister. And I was very surprised, this show being reviewed in the wife's magazine. But they gave a beautiful review of the artistry of my work, the strength of the composition, the black and whites, and all that sort of thing, completely ignoring the politics.
Of course.
Yeah. So I decided, okay, my work will have the politics embedded within it, so they cannot separate it. So for this next work that I did, all the pictures were taken at the time of the killing. When I spoke to the survivor, to the family members, they talked of how torches were shone on their face. So every picture was lit by torchlight. And the data was in a Google Earth map, and you had to dig for it. So you would then come and see how in this pristine paddy field, there was a body, and the paddy field was undisturbed. And the body had several bullet holes, but the shirt he was wearing only had one. So slowly the story begins to unravel.
So you literally went to the killing field and revealed it.
But I'm also trying to find other ways in which the politics and the art are intertwined.
But it's interesting, you're Trojan horsing it.
Completely.
Because you have to within the constraints of the society you live in, where showing a photo,
Well, I wouldn't have been allowed to show those
that's
photos,
what I'm saying.
but also I actually found this to be more powerful. And this was perhaps the most effective exhibit we've had. And in private conversation, Rapid Action Battalion has actually said that this exhibit was the most difficult period in their career that they had to deal with. Yeah?
If you don't mind, if you can unpack why do you think this image had that effect? What's the power of this?
I think the questions it raised, because they closed the show and there were policemen outside, so I interviewed the police. And I'm asking him the same question. You know, he's a paddy field, what's the problem? And he says, yeah, it's a paddy field, but you look at the word crossfire and you realize what must have happened in the paddy field. Do you make the connection? That's why people will get angry. That's why, yeah. And I said, does everyone know what crossfire is? He says, my 3-year-old daughter knows what crossfire is. I'm filming him, of course, while he's doing that. And then later, Susan and we were talking about this at Tate Modern, and I showed that film. So this policeman gives a wonderful conceptual analysis of my work, which I then include in my work itself. So that's the way we work. But I also started looking at other issues, at the indigenous community. Indigenous, by the way, is something, let me show you this. This is a technique that I developed specifically for this work. It's on straw mat, which is what the Paharis used to sleep on, and it's being burnt by a laser beam. And it's a process I developed for this work, because a lot of my work at this point is about disappearances, about the missing. Photography is very good at rendering the visible. It's not as good, or it doesn't lend itself as naturally to what is missing. So a lot of my work since then has been about what is invisible. And I was telling these stories. These are the settlements of the Paharis who've occupied this space. But it's a woman called Kalpana Chakma who was disappeared by the military. And I'm doing this story 17 years afterwards. And in this dark place where you go into the gallery, the first experience you have is the smell of the burnt grass. And the candles are lit by one. It's performative in a sense. And then a very powerful poem written in the Pahari language. By the way, the word indigenous is illegal in Bangladesh. You can get jailed for using the word indigenous. Our government bans it. We don't have indigenous people.
I am who I am, and I will persist. I shall defy.
So these are people really chanting back the same words, and it was a very powerful experience. People had tears in their eyes at the end of this show. So
how did the government respond to this?
Well, this is interesting. They closed down the Tibet show, they closed down the Crossfire show. We knew when this was happening that the military was surrounding the gallery, but they didn't close it down. You know, we'd gained some space. I think, you know, we're sort of in this cat and mouse thing. But we've continued to do the work, and we've done it in ways in which I think makes it more difficult for them to stop. But I'll move on. This is a picture I took in 1996. Stephen Mays might be somewhere in the back, in the audience, but yeah, he was then with Network Agency, and they were doing a story on HIV and AIDS, and I recognized that it was important to show it in my country, because at that time the images of HIV and AIDS were about skeletons,
right,
dooms and everything else. So we wanted to deal with the stigma. So I do this story, and the woman sitting there laughing is Hajira. She's a sex worker in the grounds of the House of Parliament. That's her beat. We became very good friends. We've stayed friends ever since. And that's also one of the joys of, you know, I live and work less than 3 miles from where I was born. This is my community. These are people I know. And Hajira, you know, she had a very difficult life. She was gang raped as a child. She you know, really very, very difficult life. And then I discovered that she'd taken all her savings to set up an orphanage for
Great
other
story.
kids.
We could applaud that. We could applaud that.
And when I ask her, I found out she doesn't take a salary. So how does it go? She says, well, we helped and other people had helped. I have a roof over my head. When my kids eat, I eat. I have 30 kids who call me mum. What more can I want? And of course, the floor is the slate. And she's very strict. They have to pray. They have to do their studies.
The handwriting is excellent.
Yeah, excellent. So anyway, that's
But
that.
I mean, it's so important, right? Because, like, regardless of society, it's sex worker, stigma.
Yeah.
And then AIDS, especially in South Asia, you don't talk about it. And if whoever gets it, of course, is a sinner. And then you show this photo that this person who's a sex worker dealing with this is actually using their life to empower others. It's so radical and disruptive.
And she's such a beautiful woman as well. What we also did with the Positive Lives work was that was the first time we showed gay people.
They don't exist, right?
Well, we have a health minister who said we can't have AIDS because we are a Muslim country.
There you go.
Anyway, so along with that, we're doing other things. And I'm showing my work, and I had my first show at the Goethe Institute. I invited all my friends, my clients, but also the janitor and the cleaner and everyone else I used to know. No one went to, none of them, none of the subaltern went to the show.
The people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So why didn't you go? And they asked me a very pertinent question. Would they have let us in? There is no rule that prevents them from going in, but I suspect that another doorman of the same social class would have stopped them from going in, thinking that was his job to do. So I thought, okay, if they can't come to my show, the show must go to them. So in Chobimala, we've got things like this. We've done shows on boats. We've done shows on camels.
Your public exhibit.
Exactly. If the people won't go to the gallery will go to the people.
I just wish we could just stay on this for a second, because we need this in America. Right? Who can afford some of these tickets? Yeah. And it's not that we don't have an appetite for it. We do. The proletariat and the commoner would love to see beautiful art, if only they were sometimes allowed in or could pay the price of admission. Just saying. Continue.
What we also did was we looked to see how stories were being told. And I'm not showing the picture here, but I'll tell you a little story. Again, during the floods, I have a camera, and if you have a camera, you're a journalist. That's what the assumption is. These kids want me to take pictures. So it's nice light. There's a large open window, Rembrandt-like soft light coming in. I stand the kids by there. They're standing up at attention, posing away. And I take the picture, and I realize that there's a kid in the middle who's blind. I thought, this blind boy, why is it so important for him to be photographed? And I've thought about it a lot. I mean, essentially, in mainstream media, in media generally, the people who matter are the stakeholders. And that happens to be the punter who pays, buys the newspaper or whatever, the shareholder, and advertisers. No one else matters. And certainly the rural poor in a country like Bangladesh does not matter. So that story never gets told. So what we started doing was to give the iPod Touch. This is 2011. We worked with World Press Photo. We set up a partnership, and we started training journalists in the village to tell stories, multimedia stories from the village, which went directly to mainstream media. Actually, it didn't go to mainstream media, at least not in Bangladesh. They weren't prepared to pay for it. There had to be an economic model. It didn't work. But Deutsche Welle does publish it, and we put it online. And there are about 1,500 stories from rural Bangladesh.
And where they, for once, are the protagonists of the narrative.
It's their story.
Yeah. And I think, just a quick aside, the story you just said was so powerful about the blind kid who knew. Like, even though he can't see, he wants to be in the frame.
Well, and
he wants to be represented also.
Well, there is a bigger point. For me, why was it important? I think that rural poor child will only exist as a statistic when it comes to the media. When it's large numbers or things like that, you and I will be individuals. They will not. But if a photograph is taken, that's the time when that person exists as an individual. And my idea that through a photograph I could transform a statistic into a person,
A
was
human,
very powerful
a narrative,
feeling.
yeah,
Absolutely. But of course we used our work for other ways as well. I mean, we were very much about social justice, about human rights. And when one of the many attacks on Gaza took place, we held a show to raise money, to send to the Palestinians. So we were doing all those sort of things. There was the agency. We also set up the school,
Right.
which became a very important school at a later stage. And this picture is of Professor Yunus at the award ceremony. And you'll notice the girl on the right, that's Rabea, who you saw much earlier looking at the contact
wow.
sheet many years ago. Yeah. And the school did very well.
Right.
For me, what was very important is, you know, when I started the school, I was the only local teacher, and I would arm twist my friends, very generous, to come and sleep on my floor and teach, and they did. Robert is there, and many other people have been teachers there. But what for me is very important today is out of our 26 teachers, 24 are former students. It's organic. They are the ones who set up this school. And they argue
Pipeline.
with me all the time.
It's
Yeah.
it's one of the pipelines we
Completely.
should employ everywhere.
So,
yeah,
let me just-
student to teacher. And
Well, exactly. And very fine students and teachers as well. This is by Taslim Akhtar. Many of you will know this image, quite well known. And this is by Assad for some unknown magazine. You know, but they're getting
up and coming magazine.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it'll get there.
Independent.
Watch out for it. Buy shares.
It has a future. And this was done by your former student.
Yep. And Taslima is now a teacher. So both of these pictures are...
I mean, I just think that's so powerful. A former student, a young girl in Bangladesh who no one would invest in. You gave her a camera, you gave her a little bit of training, you just invested just a little bit of your time and care into her. And you fast forward 2-3 decades, and she has a photo on the cover of one of the most prestigious magazines where photographers from around the world would die for a cover photo.
Completely.
That's thanks to you.
Thanks to us, a lot of people there. But I should also mention the picture of Professor Muzaffar with the police at the back. That was taken by Andrew Biraj, again, a former student who was with Reuters afterwards. But anyway, so let's move on. So this is the backdrop with
This is an amazing action shot, my friend. This is your Facebook profile photo.
Well, there you are. There's Moinuddin, who took this picture. And so these are what's been happening, and you're in the thick of things. By now, I'm actually being able to make a living as a photojournalist.
Right.
Before I wasn't. So, but while this is happening, there are other things that are going on, and this is
powerful.
These are the scratch marks on the soot of a garment factory as people are trying to flee the fire. Yeah, this is Tazreen fashion.
What was the response to this photo in Bangladesh?
In Bangladesh, it didn't get used very much because mainstream media, it's too abstract and things like that. It got used in my own story, and there it had a very powerful response, but it didn't get used by mainstream media, but we had other ways of dealing with it. So part of the story was of the carcass of the same time when I took this picture, I took a picture, a panorama of the carcass of the factory. What happens in garment factories, I mean, the fashion industry uses garments. So we decided we'd use their space to show the work. So this is a billboard we set up outside the building, which is the Owners Association of the Garment Factories. Mm. And what we did was we actually smuggled in audio tracks of the wailing of the people. Oof. Played it in the middle of the building. People came out, hearing this sound. We had a performance outside, and there's this. So they don't know what the heck's going on here, you know? They've just run away from this wailing to come up to this. And I do need to tell you, you might have had the impression when I'm saying all this that our government isn't receptive to the arts. They gave us a backdrop earlier on. When we had this show, they received us, They respond to things like
this. They love art.
Yes, exactly. So we're showing that, and then I go on to other things. This is a poem I wrote, The Sundarbans. Is the world's largest mangrove forest, a UNESCO heritage site. At the moment, there is a coal-powered power plant being built there in collaboration with India, because we are beholden to India. So, while we owe a lot to India for our independence, the fact that, we are now pretty much owned by them is an issue. But this story is problematic for a different reason. There has been a young boy called Abrar Fahad who was murdered because he critiqued India on social media. That's how difficult it gets. I'll just skim over some of these images.
This is really powerful. I mean, I hope. How let's do it. I think it's a sin to bore an audience. How are you guys doing? Are you guys with us? All right. And Shahidul and I realize we're the enemies keeping you from lunch. But if you guys are with us, right? We're good? All right, good. We'll be fine. This one is beautiful because where do you guys think this photo was taken? That's a question for you guys. Anyone? Where, what structure, what building? Okay, tell them the answer.
It's the Baitur Mosque. It's a mosque. It's the interior of a mosque. And in fact, that was also part of the idea. There are conservative groups who think photography is haram.
Forbidden.
Forbidden. In many homes, when you pray, you turn the photograph around, particularly if you have figures. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to intervene, the space itself will be my intervention. So I decided I would do a show in a mosque. No way, So I thought there's this beautiful mosque called the Baitur, which is designed by a woman, Marina Tabassum. The land has been donated by her grandmother. So there's this women's involvement as well. And I thought, okay, I spoke to Marina and we looked to see how we might do it. So the original mosque of the Prophet in Medina had a very different purpose to being merely a place of prayer. It was a cultural space, it was a community center, it was where education was given, it was a health complex, he received foreign dignitaries, women could stay there. There was an artist troupe from Abyssinia who came and said, we need a place to perform. And he said, use my mosque. So it was also an exhibition space. So I told these people, I want to take your mosque to how the Prophet had intended it to be. Now, that's a pretty powerful argument.
It's very powerful, yeah.
So not too easy to turn down. And I said, well, one condition only. Everyone must be able to go to the show. So we had the show inside the mosque, and people who'd never entered a mosque before came to this place. Now, we did have a slight problem before that because there was a local mafioso not very happy with this, and we had to take the show outside. We did it in the grounds, and then the women and the kids came and said, why is it not in our mosque? So they took it inside the mosque, and I had to do nothing. But this is a show we're hoping to tour in other places as well, because Islamophobia is something also I'm very concerned about.
It's very transformative, not just for Muslims, but also for those who otherize Muslims, especially in the United States right now. Now, please continue.
So, the Rohingya situation, so I'm photographing that. But what I need to tell you is that I've been photographing the Rohingyas from the early 90s. It's a story now. It's a story that's been there from the 70s. Yeah. So I was in the boat with this group of people coming back, and the baby with the green in the green, you'll see the picture later on. I could see the mother was tired. So I took the kid, and she was quite happy, relieved not to have to carry the kid. And the kid was, I like kids, so we get along. So the kid was with me, and you'll see that picture later on. But a more interesting thing happens, more recent thing happens. This is August 29th of July, 2018. There's a road accident, and 2 students get killed. And students come out in protest. And while I'm photographing this, I realize that the government have released their mafioso with machetes attacking these unarmed students. And I'm reporting live on this. I give an interview to Al Jazeera.
And as a result of that interview,
this happens, yeah? I spent some time in the entertainment of the government.
Where, I mean, and you have a very nice sense of humor about that, which is very lovely. I think it keeps you sane, but they tortured you.
Initially, I was tortured, and then they offered a deal. everything's forgotten, all control delete, we take you back home, nothing on the record, you stay quiet. And that was the condition. I could stay quiet. I refused. I got taken to court. This is a picture of me being taken to court. I spoke out in court. Then I got put to remand. I spent 6 days in remand. I go to jail. I spent time in jail. But while I was there, so many people across the globe, and I see many people here, but in Bangladesh, where it's so much more risky to do that, people took incredible risks to campaign for my release. And it was really unbelievable. And for me, being in prison, it meant a lot, not only to me, but also to my fellow prisoners.
Right.
Because they recognized that this was a people's struggle against a repressive regime. So I'll just show this picture. This was also taken by someone I've mentored, and that's the same kid, taken during the Rohingya period. So this was part of the campaign going on. And these were people, some unknown people who, stood up for me.
Desmond Tutu, yeah. Heard about him, up-and-comer.
But in fact, I say that in jest, but
all these people came out. It was a multicultural alliance that came out to help you. And many of your peers here who were just outraged by the fact that you, who have done so much for art, for your community, for education, simply for trying to tell the truth, were arrested and tortured. And you were the Time magazine, one of the Time magazine's 2018 People of the Year, rightfully so. And so it's the least that the rest of us could do. And that's the power of an artist, and that's the power of a storyteller, that the story eventually escapes. It can't be contained. And so many people here love you and invested in you. That's also why they came out to help you.
And there are many people here I don't know. So if some of you can put me in touch, I'd actually like to thank them at some point. But that's another story. Media. So what the government has done over this period of time is they've pretty much demolished all the institutions, the judiciary, the police, the education system, all of that's gone. So this is the press club in Bangladesh. And those are pictures of the Prime Minister dangling from the press club. Whereas at Dhrik, the new building we're trying to build, is Assange. And I should bring it home. I mean, dissent is not appreciated wherever you go. So it's not...
So we also have our own version of access journalism.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I was then going to... While I'm in jail... my sister and my partner, they come up and you can't talk. There's so much noise in there. It's very difficult to converse. So they have a little sign saying, do you want to do a show at Rubin? Yeah, well, why not? So anyway, and that decision was made while I was in jail. Later on, we were able to work on it. But
even in jail, you're a troublemaker, sir.
Well, exactly. You stay faithful to yourself.
You're loyal. You're consistent.
Thank you. So, but one of the things we did was, of course, I've been photographing the invisible, but now I don't even have a camera. And that makes photography a little bit more difficult. So what I did was I started working with my niece, Sophia, who's an architect and an artist. And we thought rather than work with Google Earth maps and things like that, we'd work from memory. The memory is a perfectly valid source. So I spoke to her, and she started making 3D models based on my period in jail. And this one is of me feeding the sparrows from my jail cell. So this is in the Rubin show right now, a little model. But one of the things that's happening now is because of the situation I'm in, I can no longer move around the way I did. So I've got to find other ways of producing work. I no longer have the mobility. I can't go around on a bicycle because it's too dangerous. I don't use a mobile phone. I have to constantly let people know where I am. So my normal way of working just is no longer valid. So I've developed other ways of working, and this is a story I'm now doing on survivors of torture. But it's using a small mobile studio, which I can take because it's not safe for them or for me. And we can find a small clandestine place where we can work, set up the studio, and I do these portraits. And I talk to them about the moment when they were in that situation. And it's painful, perhaps, but it is a space we try to go to. So this is work I'm doing now. This is the building where Drik and Patshala are going to be. So my challenge now is succession. I want to hand over to this next generation. And
We also have to live several more decades, so just
this
table the retirement for now.
Okay. But anyway, so this is the new Drik Patshala building,
Great.
which we will move into in March, hopefully. And I will end with an image which for me was very important. I mean, I was looking at the jail pictures and other things. Not that I'm recommending jail, but I actually had a very productive. Firstly, okay.
Prison was very fruitful for your artistic career.
But also, I used that time to its maximum. You know, I interviewed people every day, and it's not so difficult. You know, people have time.
Yeah.
You don't need to make appointments. You know where they live.
Yeah.
So I could go and do appointments, which I did. I did all these interviews and whatever. The prisoners took such good care of me.
Right.
And there was one instance where I was put in a special place where ordinary prisoners weren't allowed to go. They sneaked into my room, took away my mosquito net, repaired it, washed it, put it back in, because they didn't want me to get bitten by mosquitoes. You know, and all sorts, at every level, the things that they did. But for me, the most important one, I showed you the picture of the river earlier. That was deliberate, because this is a mural that my fellow prisoners have painted for me inside prison. It's there now.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a testament to your, not just your creativity and your artistry, but your spirit. It's the generosity of your spirit which has touched the prisoners, which has touched students, which has disrupted and angered the right people. And we've run out of time, but entertain me for 2 minutes if you can, because Shahidul kind of glanced over his life right now. He goes, I just I can't ride my bike anymore. It's okay, and I get stuff done. But we were talking yesterday at Pete's Coffee, this very elite establishment. And I was asking him, tell me about the impact and the cost. And he was telling me, he says, I have to tell people where I'm at all the time. He used to ride his bike freely. He works like literally 3 miles from where he was born. He cannot ride his bike anywhere. Your friends are being squeezed to isolate and pressure you. Money is being tightened. They are doing all of this to restrict your art, to hurt your financial sustainability. I mean, he has paid a price. And I just want people to kind of realize that he's still paying the price right now. Things are very difficult for him in Dhaka, and yet he's still doing this. And so how can we help you take it to the next level?
Firstly, I think you need to challenge your own government, because, and I'm not merely talking about the political situation. The reason these things happen is because it's made to happen. So, there are countries that talk about human rights and democracy, yet we've had a government that's stolen an election. We've had what's happened to me. What's happened to me is minor compared to what happens to many others. Yet, as far as the international community is concerned, it's business as usual.
Right.
Because they would much rather work with a pliant dictator than with some messy democracy. And as long as my government is prepared to deal with the Rohingya issue and deal with the war on terror and, deal with your agenda, a few human rights abuses is okay. We don't really mind that. And I think those tough questions need to be asked here. That's one. The other is I am interested in the people. I'm one person. There are so many people back there who are working incredibly hard. And I think we need to find ways in which we strengthen these institutions so that they can be robust, then they can withstand. Because one of the things I'm often asked is, okay, this government, the other government is much better either. Why should we choose the other one? It's the wrong question. Because given impunity, Gabriel would be corrupt. And I think we have a system where people can get away with anything. And while that is the case, while there is no accountability, while there's no transparency, you will always have repression and corruption. And I think what has to change is not the people necessarily, but the system. And that we need to work together at.
Well, since he's not going to do it, you can also help him by buying his book, The Tide Will Turn, which has the story and the photos, and also talk to Salma, who's right here, because he has a brilliant idea to take that photographic exhibit that he showed you about how he disrupted the mosque and tour it with other faith communities in New York, and to put a final button on it and to take us to lunch. You had an accidental birth, you were an accidental photographer, and what people might not know is you were accidentally named, because your name at birth was not Shahidul. End on that story.
Okay, well, my father's Professor Mansour, quite a famous man. I didn't know this. We have a library back home, and I'm digging through that, and I come up with Mansour's Media, which is named after my dad. But, you know, he forgot to mention that. Anyway, and my mum's quite well known too. My brother and I, we decided we didn't really want to be known as the children of famous parents. We wanted an identity for ourselves. So we went to our parents and said, we want to change our names. Why? And we gave them this argument. They thought it was a reasonable argument. So I was given the name Shahidul Alam, which actually the way it's spelt at that time was a witness of the world. At some point it became martyr of the world. So I'm not sure quite where I stand right now.
Witness. Let's stick with
Yeah,
witness.
And actually there is a reference in Egyptian mythology about linkages between witness and martyr. So, but that's another story.
Give it up to Shahidul Alam, witness of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been fantastic. Thank you. You're the one. Oh. I should take a picture. I should take a picture of this. Hey, thank you. Don't go away. I'm going to take a picture of you. Well, it won't be a selfie.
Can you guys just kind of...
Oh, no, I'm going to do this pun. Wow. And Vince too. Thank you, buddy. Take care.
And now lunch. Well done.
Thank you, everyone. A reminder, cameras can be cleaned. Your badge is good for admission to the museum across the hall. There's 2 great shows in there and 20% off in the gift shop. And Bayate's videos upstairs. Take your belongings with you, please. We'll start back up at 2 p.m. in this room.